April 10, 1912. The largest ship in the world laid in the port of Southampton, her four tall funnels towering over the buildings below. She was the largest and the most luxurious ship the world has ever seen. Her name, Titanic. Her main selling point was that she was unsinkable. But what exactly was this incredible ship? Let's find out. A shipping company called the White Star Line needed a way to compete in the ever-growing transatlantic crossing industry. Their rival, known as Cunard, had constructed two new ships, the Lusitania and Mauretania. These two new vessels were the largest and fastest ocean liners in history. A man named Bruce Ismay, the owner of the White Star Line, went to a shipping yard in Belfast called Harland and Wolff to order a new trio of ships. This trio would be called the Olympic class. The Olympic class would consist of the Olympic, Titanic, and lastly, the Britannic. These ships were originally designed by Thomas Andrews. The White Star Line wasn't going to compete with Cunard for the Blue Ribbon, which is the speed record, as this was seen as too expensive. Instead, they were going to completely outdo them in size and luxury. To put things in perspective, the largest ship at the time, Mauretania, was 790 feet long and had a gross tonnage of 31,938. For those who don't know, the term gross tonnage isn't the ship's weight. It's the amount of usable space inside a ship. Anyway, the Olympic, for example, which would be the smallest out of the three, comes in at 880 feet and had a gross tonnage of 45,324. So the Olympic is 92 feet longer and was 13,386 larger than Mauretania. This new size of ship was too big for the Harland and Wolff shipyard to handle, so they needed an upgrade. They spent 2 years expanding their shipyard for these new three ocean liners, and the first to be built was Olympic. But this video is about Titanic, so let's skip to her. Titanic's keel was laid down on March 31st, 1909, and she was launched on May 31st, 1911. After she was fitted out, she went on her sea trials and passed with flying colors. On April 3rd, 1912, just before midnight, Titanic arrived in berth 44 in Southampton at the White Star Dock. Final preparations were being made. At this time, there was a coal shortage going on, so other vessels donated some of their coal just so Titanic could set sail across the Atlantic. Titanic would need around 6,000 tons of coal to cross the ocean, which would take days to load up. Captaining this vessel would be Edward Smith, and he'd be accompanied by First Officer William Murdoch. The plan was to go from Southampton to Cherbourg, and then to Queenstown, and final New York. She would be successful for most of these destinations, but one being New York. April 10th, 1912. Passengers boarded, cargo and mail were being loaded. Everything was going to plan. It was a dull day, as England usually is, when 12 o'clock came around. She set off. This would be the last time she ever saw England. At around 6:30, she arrived at Cherbourg and picked up passengers. Then at 11:30 in the morning of April 11th, these passengers boarded via the Nomadic. She arrived at Queenstown. This was her last stop before New York. Now, over the next few days, everything went smoothly. She averaged a speed of 20 to 21 knots, which, considering she wasn't built for speed, was an impressive number. Now, Let's go over what made Titanic supposedly unsinkable. She was split into 16 different compartments. These compartments were separated using watertight doors. If the ship was taking on water, they would close these doors, and water would be trapped in the damaged compartments. She could stay afloat with any four of them flooded. But there was a flaw with this design, which I'll go over later on in this video. Another feature being her double bottom, which was basically if the ship ran aground or hit an underwater rock, it would pierce the bottom layer, but it wouldn't get into the ship as the second layer is still intact. April 14th, 1912. At 20 to 10, Titanic's radio operator received 6 warning messages about an ice field, which some passengers had noticed earlier on. It was a calm night, but it was also freezing with waters at temperature below freezing, -2 degrees, passengers sleeping and partying. But at 11:39 Titanic's lookout Frederick Fleet spotted a massive iceberg ahead of them. He rang the bell and picked up the phone, and when one of the crew answered, he shouted, "Iceberg right ahead." By the time the crew got the message, they had around 30 seconds to avoid a collision. But steering a 50,000-ton ship at speed just wasn't possible, and at 11:40, she struck the berg. The iceberg pocked hole in her steel plates like Morse code, damaging 6 compartments to over her limit. Remember when I said her watertight compartments had a flaw? Well, the problem was most watertight compartments only went up to E deck, while a few went to D. This meant water could spill over the compartments one by one. After she hit the berg, Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews and First Officer William Murdoch had a meeting, and they were told the ship was going down. Jack Phillips, the radio operator, sent a distress call to all ships in the area, but only Carpathia responded. They said they could be there in 4 hours, but Titanic simply didn't have that time. Lifeboats started being lowered, but people refused to enter the boats as she was marked unsinkable, so lifeboats were launched only half full. It wasn't until they saw the bow of the ship go under until they realized the true seriousness of the situation. Panic erupted, and only now were boats being launched mostly filled. Sadly, Captain Smith went down with his ship as if he survived. He'd be labeled a coward. The band aboard Titanic started to play music to try calm people down, the most famous song being "Nearer My God to Thee." Then one of Titanic's 5-story tall, 60-ton funnels fell, crushing people below. At 2:18 in the morning, the ship split in two, and a few minutes later, she went under, 12,500 feet under, leaving passengers dead or stranded. At 4 in the morning of April 15th, the Carpathia arrived, picking up lifeboats and providing care for the survivors. On April 18th, she arrived in New York. Word spread quickly, and angry family members and the public stood outside the White Star Line office with questions. In total, 1,500 people died, leaving 700 alive. Olympic offered to help Carpathia with saving passengers, but it was thought that if the survivors saw a near-identical ship to the one they saw hundreds die on, it would trigger some PTSD and be too much for them to handle, which is fair. The wreck of the Titanic wouldn't be discovered until 1985, which is a long time being undiscovered. Overall, the Titanic has gone down in history, and if you asked a stranger to name a ship, they'd probably say Titanic. The popularity was also probably because of the famous 1997 movie Titanic, which everyone here has probably watched. And that concludes the history of R.M.S. Titanic. That's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to subscribe for more future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.